Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Let's go there. Let's do this. I want to recap a little bit of yesterday's talk with Michael Anton from Hillsdale on the chaos that is November 3rd to January 20th. Let's just talk about it. I mean, you can walk away from this conversation thinking that cooler heads will prevail on November 3rd and our better angels will rise up and everything will be just hunky-dory, or not. I personally do not see a scenario where, let's say Trump wins and the Democrats say, good one, Mr. President. You bested us again. Well played. Or the other way around. I just don't see that going well. So let me share some things here and we'll see what we can do with it all. First, this is a fact. We will not know the election results on November 3rd. That's done. This is Mark Zuckerberg a couple days ago, and he said it's the media's job to tell people and get people prepared for the fact that the results will not come in right away. Here he is.
So we're going to do a bunch of different messaging around that just to make sure that people know that that's normal. So if one of the candidates in any of the races claims victory before there's a consensus result, then we're going to add some informational context to that post directly, saying that there's no consensus result yet. I think that this is important because there is, unfortunately, I think, a heightened risk of civil unrest in the period, between voting and a result being called or after that. And I just think that we need to be doing everything that we can to reduce the chances of violence or civil unrest in the wake of this election.
So the first part of that, if anyone claims victory before the results, that's interesting, right? What if it's very clear that Trump won? Right? Election night, Trump just crushes. The media is going to say, all the results aren't in. Got to count every ballot. It's not over, which will very quickly turn into, sure, Trump may be winning, but we still got to count all the votes. And then, Trump will probably lose once we count all the ballots. To Trump will lose. To Trump is losing. To Trump lost. To see how quickly that will turn into that. When Trump then says he won at any point in that entire process, the social media companies will deplatform him because, as Zuckerberg just said, he is spreading violence and civil unrest until the results are fully in. And then they're just going to keep dragging it out until they get the result that they want. This is Hillary Clinton just a couple days ago. She said Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstance because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is. Do not concede under any circumstance. Under any circumstance. What if Trump won? Do not concede under any circumstance. And the goal is to drag it out, and then the country's going to look like Orange County, California, a bunch of other counties in California where the Republicans win on election night, and then every day the lead dwindles and dwindles and dwindles and dwindles until the Democrat ends up winning. Happened a ton in 2018. So, right, hold out, delay, more madness and chaos in the streets. The media plays their role in seeding the chaos and just the obviousness of Trump's eventual loss and Biden's win and fraud, scam, whatever word they decide to, it was rigged, Trump's stealing the election, whatever. Remember, don't concede under any circumstances. Even if you lose, don't concede. Okay? So then what? Drag it on until what? Until when? January 20th. Why? What's January 20th? It's a long time, by the way. What's January 20th? Inauguration Day. Okay, so now just get ready for the craziest thing that I've ever said on the show. January 20th is when the military can legally drag him out. Trump. January 20th is when the military can, constitutionally, his term ends on January 20th, 2021, and the military could drag him out of the White House. That's a ridiculous sentence. I'm not saying that is what should happen. But the Democrats are talking about that. So Reuters did an interview with Al Gore out of nowhere, right? Why? When's the last time you heard from Al Gore? I think like 5 years ago, maybe it was like something about global warming. Al Gore was last mentioned. Like, who's ever talked to Al Gore about anything? And here's what this is Reuters. Gore said he believes the rule of law would hold fast this year, even if Trump does not accept the election results. Quote, it's not really up to him, Gore said, noting that Trump's term would end on January 20, 2021, if he loses under parameters set by the U.S. Constitution. U.S. Secret Service and other military and security forces would answer to the new president as of that date, Gore added. Again, who asked Al Gore about this? Why is Al Gore talking about anything? So that's weird. 2 Army officers, and we mentioned this yesterday with Michael Anton, 2 Army officers, one was a lieutenant colonel, retired, wrote an open letter to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said if Donald Trump refuses to leave the office at the end of his constitutional term, the United States military must remove him by force, and you must give that order to the Joint Chiefs. The entire letter is a total whack job letter. I mean, we're not going to take the time to debunk every single sentence of it, but like, what? Right? Like open letters to the Joint Chiefs to get rid of the president? So then you think, Slater, come on. You quote Al Gore and like some nobodies from the military, whatever. That's not convincing enough. Okay, here's Joe Biden.
Single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is a guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, direct voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary. And I was so damn proud. Here you have 4 chiefs of staff coming out and ripping the skin off of Trump. And you have so many rank and file military personnel saying, whoa, we're not a military state. This is not who we are. I promise you, I'm absolutely convinced they will escort him from the White House with great dispatch.
First of all, I've heard that clip like 20 times. It was the first time I noticed that Biden said they're ripping the skin off. I feel like if Trump said that he's ripping the skin off, I would get some news. That's weird. Isn't that a weird thing to say? Like, what was that? Like, coming out of nowhere, talking about the military pulling him out of the White House? And there's a bunch of lower level Democrats talking about this too, a bunch of editorials in the Washington Post and stuff like that. But that's weird that Al Gore, Hillary, and Biden himself are talking about the military, right? There was a group of 100 Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans who did this war game on what's going to happen on the election. It's called the Transition Integrity Project. Bill Clinton's chief of staff, White House chief of staff, John Podesta, played the part of Biden. And they just war gamed out what would happen. So war games is just like role playing, and you think about strategy and what you would do in response to different things and kind of play it all out. It's crazy. The whole thing's crazy. And their prediction / strategy, they admit all of this, to stretch it out until January 20th. They use that date, January 20th. Again, why? We just talked about it. And then they also include this nice little ditty. A show of numbers in the streets and actions in the streets. What do you think they're referring to there? A show of numbers in the streets. And they're talking about like yoga? That's the yoga session in the streets? A show of numbers in the streets. Just a nice little polite gathering. Maybe decisive factors in determining what the public perceives as a just and legitimate outcome. What is the just and legitimate outcome? Well, it doesn't matter. It's what the public perceives. How do we do that? A lot of people in the streets. During our exercises, the wargaming, Team Biden almost always called for and relied on mass protests to demonstrate the public's commitment to a legitimate outcome, with the objective of hardening the resolve of Democratic elected officials to fight and take action and to dramatize the stakes. Okay? Stretch it out. Add chaos and riots. Try and delegitimize the president in the process, make Biden seem like the obvious winner. Like, well, of course Biden won. I mean, look, sure, in these states right now, Trump may be winning, but of course Biden's going to win once we count all the votes, right? And just make it like Trump's delegitimized, put Biden up and like have him give speeches where he looks like the president, and just keep pushing this until Trump steps down, or last resort, use the military to drag him out. What? Now, of course, the loser of the election could politely and graciously concede, and that's the end of it. But it's 2020. Have you been watching this episode? Nothing can be easy. I think the closest parallel to this is 1876. So we'll give a quick history lesson here. So Rutherford B. Hayes, he was the governor of Ohio, and you had the governor of New York, Tilden, 1876. Tilden was the Democrat. Tilden won the popular vote, which isn't a thing, by the way. Just a friendly reminder, there's no such a thing as the popular vote, but he won that. He was one electoral vote shy of winning the Electoral College. One! I don't know what it was back then, but you have to get 270 today. So it'd be like if Trump or Biden got 269. They're like, you're one away from getting the majority, right? One vote away. But there were 4 states that they didn't know the results. And there was just no way of knowing. It wasn't like, we're going to recount them and try to, it was gone. It was just like, we're not. It was Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon. They literally did not know who won, and they were never going to find out who won. A bunch of other states were super close. I think there were 13 states that were less than a 4% difference between them, right? So a lot of the states were close, and 4 of them, they're like, we don't know. Like the Iowa caucus. They're just like, we're never going to know who won, right? So the Electoral College was gone. It didn't exist anymore at that point. There was no way to figure out who won these states. And there was no structure in place to figure out what to do next. The House and the Senate were split. I forget which party had which, but they were split. So they came to a compromise. Right? The 2 party leaderships, they came together, came to a compromise, and the Democrats agreed, okay, we'll let Rutherford B. Hayes win, we'll let the Republican take the presidency, but in exchange, you, Hayes, have to pull federal troops out of the South. This was right after the Civil War, so this was during Reconstruction. So the federal troops were in the South to make sure that newly freed slaves had the proper rights and protections that they now had after the war. So the Democrats said, all right, Republican Hayes, you can win, but you got to get the federal troops out of here. And he did. And then the Democratic Party in the South, they were called the Redeemers. They took over, and that led to the Jim Crow laws that we had in this country for almost 100 years. All right, so those federal troops were there to protect the newly freed slaves. And as soon as they left, because of this compromise, the Redeemer Democrats took over and ushered in the racist Jim Crow laws. I share that because I think that's the closest thing we're going to see. I think today is 1876 is the parallel to today. Because I think there's going to be states that we don't know, like we won't know. It'll just be so much chaos. We're like, I don't know. We're never going to know who won, right? And if Trump wins, there's going to be so much chaos, so much outrage. The left will not stop until I think they get some sort of deal, right? So let's say Trump wins. He wins. The Democrats are not going to concede. Hillary Clinton said as much. Do not concede under any circumstance. So they're going to try to get something out of it. And I think they're going to go to the bargaining table and say, listen, these riots are going to continue unless, and some of the things they want, as we talked about yesterday, they want DC and Puerto Rico to become states so that they get 4 more Democratic senators. They want reforms to the Supreme Court, pack the court, or put life term limits on or something like that. Or what was the other one? Supreme Court, get rid of the Electoral College completely, right? And in which case, no Republican would ever win the presidency again. So hey, we'll stop the rioting if we do this grand compromise. Now, the good news is I don't like to use the word trust when it comes to someone in DC, but there's no one I trust more not to cave to the demands of the left than Trump. And Kavanaugh was the perfect example of that. Mitt Romney would have caved on Kavanaugh in the middle of the whole thing, and Trump never did. So I trust Trump more than like a Romney, for instance. So we'll see. Listen, 2016, as crazy as it was, no one contested the results the next day. People were shocked and all that, and they made up this Russian collusion thing afterwards. But there was still an inauguration that Hillary went to, right? But now we have Hillary telling Biden not to concede under any circumstance. I don't see this going well. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I cannot get over this Atlantic story. I know we're way past it. We're supposed to be talking about Bob Woodward now. It's going to be one of these every single day, which is the point that I want to make here, actually. The point is just to bombard you with these hoaxes every single day, and you just can't keep up. But one more point on this Atlantic story, because I think it's very illustrative, and it should be the filter that we use as we think about all the other stories that are going to be coming from now until January 20th. This is Sean Davis from The Federalist. He said the Venn diagram of journalists who bought and peddled the Iraq weapons of mass destruction hoax, the Rolling Stone UVA rape hoax, the Russian collusion hoax, the Covington hoax, the Kavanaugh hoax, the Ukraine hoax, and the latest Atlantic hoax, it's a single circle. Take note of who's inside it. So here's the very short, in case you missed it all. 2018, Trump was in Paris, and he did not want to go to a second American cemetery. This is the claim from The Atlantic. Here's the line. Trump rejected the idea of the visit because he feared his hair would become disheveled in the rain, and because he did not believe it important to honor American war dead, according to 4 people with firsthand knowledge of the discussion that day. So we did a lot about this the other day. That's a garbage sentence. You cannot write that. You cannot say according to 4 people with firsthand knowledge of the discussion. What does that even mean? Is that the same thing as people who heard him say it? Because if it is, why not just say according to 4 people who heard it? All right, that is someone who's hiding something. And that's the 3rd sentence of the article. It gets worse from there. So my whole point is it's made up. It's completely made up. I know people think, what do you mean it's made up? It's made up. Just like everything else has been made up these last 3.5 years. 19 people. And Pulitzer, we have so much to do right now, but Pulitzer Prizes have been won by journalists who just make stuff up. 19 people have come out on the record and said it didn't happen. Now, those people could be lying too, right? They could be covering for their boss, except for one of those people is John Bolton, who's no fan of the president. He just wrote this whole book criticizing the president. And he came out and he's like, I was there, that didn't happen. A couple of aspects of that sentence, right? First, he didn't want to mess up his hair. The next day, the president went to a different American cemetery in the pouring rain. I think we have video of this. Okay, there's the president walking up with his umbrella, puts the umbrella down in the rain, gives the speech, whole thing. So he didn't want to mess up his hair. Nonsense. We have Freedom of Information Act records of the military writing back and forth about the weather conditions and how it was unsafe to fly. So that was not a made-up excuse, all right? Because that's the claim. The claim was it was a made-up excuse because the president really just didn't want to be with all those losers in the ground, all those veteran losers. So he made up an excuse about the weather. This is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He's on CNN.
John Bolton, in his tell-all book, which was no love letter to President Trump, had a very different version. So let me just read to you how he, who was there, said that day unfolded. He said the weather was bad. Marine One's crew was saying that bad visibility could make it imprudent to chopper to the cemetery. The ceiling was not too low for Marines to fly in combat, but flying POTUS was obviously something very different. If a motorcade were necessary, it would take between 90 and 120 minutes each way, along roads that were not exactly freeways, posing an unacceptable risk that we could not get the president out of France quickly enough in the case of emergency. What's your response?
My response is, I'm sure all of those things are true. I've heard from people in the Pentagon Marines who are a bit insulted that the idea that the Marines couldn't fly a helicopter in the rain.
Right. Of course, they could fly a helicopter in the rain. He said it wasn't prudent. But that first thing, he said, of course, I think those things are true. That's the premise of the entire article you're making. The foundational premise is that Trump did not want to go because he thought veterans are suckers and losers and had to make up this story about the weather. And now you're admitting that it really was, in fact, because of the weather. But that's the premise of of your whole thing. So why would we believe anything else that follows? Then on MSNBC, he was asked about anonymous sources. And he said that people wanted to remain anonymous because they're scared for their lives, which is absurd. You know, Obama was the one who used the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers more than all of the previous presidents combined, right? So what are people afraid of? What fear does someone have? The Trump will tweet mean things about you, call you names. Bolton wrote an entire book disparaging Trump. Trump didn't arrest him, didn't throw him in a gulag. Nonsense, this idea of fear, they're scared to go. Give me a break. So listen, here's Goldberg. He makes it Trump's fault that these people refuse to go on the record. It's Trump's fault that The Atlantic can't actually prove their accusation.
It is a reasonable question to ask why people who have had direct exposure to Donald Trump, who know what Donald Trump has said, who know what Donald Trump has done, won't simply come out and say it. And I share that view that it's not good enough. But, you know, like other reporters, I'm always balancing out the moral ambiguities and complications of anonymous sourcing with a public's right to know. I mean, the sources are not anonymous to me. Jennifer Griffin said that from Fox News when she was challenged. And I trust these sources. These are people in the various rooms. And but yeah, obviously it would be better if people would say, attach their names to what they know.
What are we doing? You're going to take that guy's word for it? Give me a break. Even he says it's not good enough. So just to recap, here's the claim. Trump rejected the idea of the visit because he feared his hair would become disheveled in the rain, and because he did not believe it was important to honor American war dead, according to people with firsthand knowledge of the discussion that day. So far, proven and admitted it was indeed because of the weather and security concerns. He did not have a concern about his hair. He went to the cemetery the next day in the pouring rain. The editor-in-chief says anonymous sources aren't good enough. What are we doing here? And Bolton said the entire thing was false. But it doesn't matter. And this is why I wanted to harp on this again, because the smear's already out there. And that's how the Democrats' PR wing works. We call it the media. That's how their PR wing works. 2 months until the election. 2 months. And they throw a lie out there, and a couple days later they'll retract or they'll put the disclaimers on it and all that stuff, and we forget the truth a couple days later, but the damage is already done. I'll give you another quick example of this, and it's multiple times a day. Like in the past, you get a story like this maybe like once a week, and then lately it's been like one a day. Now it's going to be 100 of these a day. Like a fire hose until you can't breathe of these hoaxes, and that's the point. That's the point, is to overload the system, overload your brain with just lies. So here's today's example. This is a guy, I don't know, he's got 1 million followers. I don't know, he's some Democrat guy. He said the Sturgis motorcycle event that should have never happened is now linked to an estimated 250,000 cases of COVID, and it could cost us up to $12 billion. Vote out Trump and every anti-mask, virus-loving lapdog Republican, this election, the next one. Then you see rallies in the New York Times and all that stuff. So here's what happened. South Dakota. Well, so the claim was that in August, I think it was August like 7th or something, there were 500,000 motorcyclists went to Sturgis, South Dakota for this big motorcycle rally, right? So 250,000 COVID cases and $12.2 billion in public health costs. Okay, that's the claim. And the headlines everywhere, whole thing, right? So here's what really happened. Okay, so that goes out there, makes the headlines damage done. Takes a day before the truth comes out. In South Dakota, after the rally, there were 124 new cases. 124. Not 124,000, 124 linked to the rally. Linked means someone gets COVID, they say, hey, where you been the last few days? And like, oh, I was at this motorcycle rally. Oh, okay, you probably got it from that, right? Nationwide, there were people in 11 other states who also went to that rally who got COVID, for a total of 260. Okay, so how do we go from 260 to 250,000? What in the world? Here's what they did. They tracked the cell phones of everyone who went to the motorcycle rally and then followed them anonymously to their home county. And then they took the increase in COVID cases from before the motorcycle rally to after the motorcycle rally and attributed all of those cases to that one person who went to the motorcycle rally. Okay, so I'm in San Diego County. Let's say there was 100 cases of COVID before the rally. Someone from San Diego goes to South Dakota, they go to the motorcycle rally, they come back, and now there's 200 cases in San Diego County. The study would attribute all 100 new cases to that motorcycle rally. But that's the most ridiculous thing. The analysis did not take into account any other factors. Like if schools opened up here in San Diego, right across the border, didn't take into account any number of other events that could have taken place in a county that could have caused an increase of cases. It was all caused by this one person going to a motorcycle rally from that county. That's the most laughable thing ever. That's how they got to 250,000. And then how did they get to 12.2 billion? They assumed that each case cost $46,000 per person. Where'd they get $46,000? That's the cost of someone who requires hospitalization, which very few of these 250,000 people did. You know, in colleges, there were studied 29 universities, 26,000 positive cases, no hospitalizations. I think I just read this morning that there was 1 hospitalization so far from a college kid. Okay, now obviously a motorcycle rally is a little bit different demographic, it's gonna be older, but to assume that every single one of those 250,000 people, first of all, were connected to the rally, and second of all, required hospitalization of $46,000, that is so absurd, but it made a great headline, $12.2 billion. That's straight fear-mongering, it's straight propaganda. And there's no benefit to this, no benefit to that analysis. Nothing helpful can come from that. It's just hackery. And they know it. That's why in the paper they wrote this. After they put the $12.2 billion, if you go to the actual 40-page paper, it says this is by no means an accurate accounting of the true externality cost of the event. However, this calculation is nonetheless useful, as it provides a ballpark estimate. No, it doesn't. That's not even close to a ballpark of how large of an externality a single super spreading event can impose, and a sense of how valuable restrictions on mass gatherings can be. That's not in the ballpark. 260 actual cases, and you're saying 250,000 cases, and probably a public health cost of like $100,000, and saying it's 12.2 billion. You're not in the ballpark. You made it all up. But that's all it takes. They get the headline, and the articles don't have any disclaimers like that, and no truth. And you got to get someone like me who gets paid to do this to take the time to go and find it. How can anyone else take the time to do that? No one does. Also worth knowing, the Black Lives Matter protests, no new cases of COVID. Remember studies came out about that? No cases from Black Lives Matter protests. I mean, I share this, just be ready. You will be bombarded with this from, well, now, but certainly November on, just nonstop hoaxes. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, let's take a deep breath. I need this. I want to go to Reverend Markel Hutchins. He is a human and civil rights leader, and he's the lead organizer of the National Faith and Blue Weekend, which is coming up in just a month here. Reverend, how are you today, sir?
Wonderful. It's good to be with you. How are you?
And good to talk. I'm doing great, and I'm encouraged by what you have going on here. I'm glad to spread the word a little bit. What is Faith and Blue?
So National Faith and Blue Weekend is the most collaborative and largest police community collaboration project in recent American history. The faith-based organizations in our nation have unmatched and unrivaled potential to bridge the divides, to decrease bias, to increase mutual trust and understanding between law enforcement and all of the communities that they serve. And if ever there was a period in history where we need bridge building, it is right now. The unprecedented hour of division and polarization, particularly around policing in America, it really is a dangerous moment for us. But I think we can turn to each other, not on each other, and we'll see a real decrease in the tensions and an increase in public safety overall. And that's what National Faith and Blue Weekend aims to do, to spur a movement where law enforcement professionals and residents build connections that break down those bias, that decrease bias and builds bridges between Americans of every walk of life.
It is absolutely the answer, and there's no one that's more qualified to do it than the church. And I'm so grateful for you, Reverend, for stepping up and doing that. So I love this idea of increasing mutual trust. How do we do that? It's nice to say, right? But what's that look like?
Well, it looks like seeing the humanity in one another. Most of the conversation in the country today around policing and police reform focuses on policies and procedures. But I submit, Mike, that the greatest answers to our challenges in America today won't be printed in ink on a piece of legislation, a policy or procedures manual, or in an executive order. They will be imprinted in the hearts and minds of every law enforcement professional and every member of the public. We have to deal with issues that are far beyond policy and procedure. What killed George Floyd, what put the knee on the neck of George Floyd, what killed the officers that have been assassinated in Dallas and Houston and other places was not policy and procedure. It was what was in the hearts and minds of people. And that's what we have to address. That can only happen through human engagement, through human experience, seeing each other's humanity, seeing each other beyond our differences. And that's what National Faith and Blue Weekend is all about, creating that level of reformation in the United States of America, because that and that alone is going to transform us from this dark hour to a brighter day.
Yeah, that's it. Reverend, you got it. I know you got it, and that's clearly it. It's clearly the answer. It's so good. What would you say is a sin that has infiltrated our hearts that relevant to this scenario?
I think it's the sin of probably judgment and not seeing the humanity in other people. The folks that are marching and protesting in the street, the vast and overwhelming majority of them have pure hearts. They have pure intentions. They want to be seen. They want to be heard, and they want their realities to be not only felt but also taken into consideration by law enforcement. On the flip side of that, the vast and overwhelming majority of the law enforcement professionals in our country go to work every day to protect and serve with fairness and equity. And really, we have to figure out a way to bring those two realities together. I think it really is a sin for us not to see the humanity in one another. Just as we believe we are right, others who see the world differently believe they're right as well. That's what our challenge is as a nation today, to realize that in order for us to be right doesn't mean that someone else has to be wrong. We have to see that level of humanity in one another. If we're going to see a reduction in the crime and violence that continues to rise as tensions rise, but as well, if we're going to see a real decrease in the officer-involved tragedies that have divided our nation, we've got to dig deeper than just protesting and marching. And look, I have led some of the largest and most successful civil rights campaigns in my home state of Georgia and around this country. I believe in marching and protesting, but once that is over, once we have brought injustices to light, what do we do to actually solve the problems? And things like National Faith and Blue Weekend give us the opportunities in neighborhoods of every kind to actually solve problems.
I'm grateful for you, Reverend. You talk about the shared humanity, and the word dehumanizing keeps coming to my mind, and how that's the beginning of every bad thing we'll just do the 20th century, is the dehumanizing of others. And I see a lot of that here. What is pride is the answer, but I want to know what you think of, because I'm sure you've seen this as a reverend and you think about it all the time. Why do we not want to see the other side? What is it in us?
Well, I think it's because we see the world only through the lenses in which we see the world. We see the world through our own experiences, and it takes courage to see the humanity in one another. It takes courage to see the world through a set of lenses that are different than your own, because if all that you've ever seen and known is where you are and where you've been and where you've come from, then you don't have the natural ability to step outside of one's own existence. What we need in our country today is people to dig deeper. I've challenged every major law enforcement organization in the country to see the world through the lenses of those who they're policing. And on the flip side of that, we've got to cause these young people who are marching and protesting so passionately in the street. And sometimes we certainly have paid provocateurs and anarchists that are disrupting and corrupting a lot of the well-intentioned protests and gatherings and calls for justice and fairness. But the vast and overwhelming majority of us are good people. We have to believe in the humanity of one another. We are not nearly as divided as we are disconnected. We have to work around our commonalities rather than being divided by our differences. And that's what Faith and Blue Week is all about. The truth is,
I like that line.
The challenges that people are facing in Portland, Oregon are different than they're facing in Savannah, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, or Suffolk County, New York. But if we can all come together in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, law enforcement, faith communities, businesses, ordinary citizens, and sit at the table of what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called brotherhood and sisterhood, there's no limit to the good we can do. There's no problem that can't be solved when we work together collaboratively. Dr. King was fond of saying, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. What I'm doing is calling our nation to a higher plateau of destiny and a more noble expression of our humaneness. We can solve these problems. We can solve problems that led to George Floyd's death, historic impediments to opportunities for people of color, the hatred and visceral anger that has misdirected our law enforcement professionals. We can do this, but we have to do it in every neighborhood and every community. And that's what National Faith and Blue Weekend seeks to do, to spur that movement.
Yeah, Reverend, we don't have enough time, sir. Can we talk again before the big weekend on, October 9th?
Absolutely. October 9th through October the 12th. But here's what I would ask all of your audience to do, Brother Slater. I would ask each one of your audience to go to www.faithandblue.org, www.faithandblue.org, and sign up to host an event. Every law enforcement agency, every church, every synagogue, every mosque, every temple must be a part of the solution. And we've provided all of the resources that are necessary to organize some sort of event in your local community, bringing law enforcement and the community at large together through faith-based institutions. We need your help in getting the word out, causing people to organize. We can really see change in our country if we work together.
Yeah, Reverend, love that. Faithandblue.org, Reverend Markel Hutchins. Reverend, let's talk again, sir. If I can amplify this even a little bit more, it'd be an honor. Grateful for you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, thanks for being here. So I talk about modern art a lot. By talk about, I mean destroy, because I think it is the perfect, it's the visual manifestation and representation of bad ideas, right? So like we see bad ideas in our education system and we see the fruit of that, right? We see bad ideas when it comes to criminal justice reform, and we see the fruit of that, right? We see bad ideas with communism, and we see the bodies, we see the fruit of that. And I think modern art is just another example. These are bad ideas. This is postmodern progressive thinking and ideology that manifested in a pile of rubble and like barbed wire around it and like some paint splashed on it, and we call it art, right? Like, oh no, that's not art. But it's all, oh, who are you to say, right? It's all this big question. Who are you to say what is art? And this is challenging the normative perspective of what art really is, blah, blah, blah. It's modern art, right? And I do the same thing with architecture. Our buildings out there today are so ugly. My wife is so annoyed at me because everywhere we go, I'm always driving and I'm like, man, that's an ugly building. Just nonstop all the time. It's because it's bad ideas, bad art, bad architecture come from bad ideas and bad ideologies and philosophies. Anyway, I want to give some good examples of that. On my radio show the other day, we did a breakdown of the 3 D words that you hear all the time. Disrupt, dismantle, and deconstruct. So there are 3 different variances, and we're not going to go through each and every one of them. But you see the left disrupting art. So that would be literally tearing down statues, right? So they're disrupting it. You see the left dismantling art. Dismantle is when you infiltrate an organization and you destroy it from within. So one of my favorite cancellations this year was the curator, the head of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, was fired because he said that he's like, listen, everyone, it was at a big group meeting. He's like, listen, we're still going to collect work from white artists too, because if we don't, that would be reverse discrimination. So we're going to continue to do that. And he was fired. That got him fired. I'm not kidding you. That guy's the curator for like 20 years and he's gone. Isn't that amazing? So that's dismantling an institution. That's when you get the super woke. I mean, it's a museum of modern art, so you're gonna have pretty progressive people anyway, but you have super woke people infiltrating this organization and ultimately destroying it from within. And then you have deconstruction. So deconstruction is when you change the concept of anything. It's usually language, words, but it can be art as well. So you change the meaning of art. And that's what modern art is. Okay, so New York Times wrote an article called America's Monuments, Reimagined for a More Just Future. So the New York Times went out and they asked 5 artists to reimagine what memorials or whatever. So you go and they tear down a Confederate statue, right? We tear down all these statues, hundreds of statues across the country, we tear them down. What should we put there instead? Right? What public monument should be put there instead? Let's reimagine this space. What would you place? They went out to 5 artists, and I think it's worth taking some time to go over the suggestions here. These are gold. All right. The first one is called Monument to the Multitudes Who Suffered and Suffer the Violent Establishment of the Global Economy. Okay? This is great. When I was asked to propose a monument, this is the artist, my first impulse was to sand away the faces on Mount Rushmore. Think about that for a second. Like, that's amazing. Like, that tells you something. That this guy's first instinct is to destroy something. Like, imagine that. You're given the chance. It's like, imagine you're in the scenario. Imagine the New York Times came to you and said, hey, here's, like, you get this space. This is your space. We tore down this statue of George Washington. You get to put here whatever you want. And you can work with a real artist to, like, make it happen, right? Because, like, what would I actually build? But your vision, your idea, you can do whatever you want. Like, that's super exciting. I'd be like, oh, geez, who would I'd probably put the George Washington statue back up. But what would I put here? Imagine being a person who your first thought is, well, I'm going to destroy everything else first. I'm going to destroy that statue before it, right? That's an amazing mentality. But that's who we're dealing with here. As one individual, a Black American trans man, how could I suggest a single monument in solidarity with all people of the United States as we try to heal the impossibly deep wounds of hundreds of years of slavery, the genocide of Native Americans, the killing of BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, and trans people, mass economic injustice, and the caging of children. Jeez, this guy's a blast to hang out with. Here's his monument. I chose materials that can exist harmoniously with a warming planet. Using carbon capture technology to inject excess atmospheric carbon into volcanic basalt, I propose the creation of a series of large spherical boulders that will eventually grow moss, plants, and flowers. The multivalent forms could be installed in many US landscapes, as there's nowhere that white supremacy has not touched. Okay, so just to be clear here, this guy's idea for his monument is a rock that moss grows on. Okay? So a boulder, spherical boulder, and we have moss grow on it. Okay, that's the first idea. Second suggestion here. Here's the artist. Monuments to figures like Christopher Columbus, George Washington, and Theodore Roosevelt are symptoms of domination in the psychogeography of the city. We could imagine, for instance, a garden of our miseries. Okay, that's the title of his piece. Garden, these are great people. Garden of our miseries, in which the heroes of murder and empire decompose, as so many ruins have, providing a space of public reflection on the disastrous course of Western civilization. Stripped of their vertical phallic power, the fragments of these columns and statues become the symbolic centerpiece and physical anchor for an organizing hub, blah, 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 blah. All right, so here's the idea is a graveyard. So his idea is like just a dump, a graveyard of all these statues toppled over. All right, so you with me so far on the two suggestions? A rock with moss on it and statues toppled over. That's what we got so far. Third suggestion is we close Rikers Island Prison, all right, in New York. They got 10,000 prisoners there. They have 100,000 prisoners come in and out throughout the year. Close it, turn it into a garden. This is a great line right here. The pleasure gardens, that's what they're going to be called, the pleasure gardens, may become many things. A sauna for queer and trans people to be naked in nature. A shelter for homeless survivors of intimate violence. A polycultural food source available for sustainable foraging. So be careful where you're foraging. You don't want to come across the sauna. We won't know until we assemble ourselves with ramps, toilets, and free food and decide what we want. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, you with me? That's the third option. Okay. Fourth option. I've reimagined the site of an old statue, rendering an earthen mound in a place where native populations flourished. If a plinth or foundation is analogous to unbending belief systems and structures, then this deteriorating structure reflects a breakdown of those systems and their underlying doctrines. So the fourth piece of art is a pile of dirt. She calls it an earthen mound. Okay, it's a pile of dirt with some rocks crumpled on top to prove, like, to represent the destruction of past. Right? And then the fifth statue is one of Kwame Nkrumah's, arguably one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century. Okay, he was the first president, I think, of Ghana. and he was this was right after British colonial rule, and he was a socialist, and then went on to name himself president for life until he was ultimately overthrown. But he's a hero because he's a hero to the left because he was a Pan-Africanist against the colonists, the white colonists, right? Now, of the 5 suggestions, this one's the best because at least it's an actual statue, right? So I gotta give this person credit for at least a statue of a thing, right? So, there are the 5. Let's reflect. We got 5 artists. We have 1 statue of a socialist dictator, a pile of dirt, a mold-covered rock, a pile of destroyed statues, and a garden sauna for queer and trans people to be naked in nature. Who are these people? Like literally, who are these people? How do you become, what? The whole thing just boggles my mind. But this is the visual representation of postmodernism, of bad ideas. I mean, you compare the statues that are being torn down and the beauty of them to this. You're like, oh, which society would you rather live in? It's amazing. One of these artists, I went to their website, and I think it was in Knoxville, and it's table. They're on the shore of the river, and there's just tables stacked on top of each other. And I guess it's like the water table or something. And you're like, would you get paid for that? How much money do you make off this? It's amazing. And I would laugh more if these people did not have way too much influence over our culture and our politics right now. But as ugly as these statues are, as ugly and ridiculous as these statues are, again, that's a metaphor for the ugly and ridiculous ideas that we're all operating on in our popular culture today. And that's a big problem. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Got our special tomorrow about riots in our cities. So it's coming up tomorrow. Spread the word.